Hi, listeners. Before we continue with the episode, we just wanted to come on and talk to you about Tidy Think UK. They are an award-winning planner company and they are backed by universities. I have two planners from them at the moment. So this is my teacher planner for this year. This is Starry Night. It's absolutely beautiful and it's personalised and I just love it. Everything about it is brilliant. The way it is laid out, the ease of use, it's colour coded, and it has been my life saviour this year. I would highly recommend them, and I recommend them so much that I already have my planner for next year. Now, this is Secura. Now, the design is Secura. Now, what you'll see is this is a ring binder. This is new for this year. I absolutely love it. So this is the binded one, okay, and this is the ring binder. It's absolutely beautiful. Again, we've got personalisation. So I've got Miss Wildly Practitioner. It's got corner protectors. And for next year, we've got slightly different stuff at the beginning. So there are QR codes to check out different people. We are at the top as well. So there's a little spiel about us. And then there's a QR code there as well. But you've got also Helping Teachers Thrive and Miss Easter egg. So absolutely brilliant. A few things about them. So like I said, they're backed by universities. They're award winning. They have so many designs. Just go and check out their website. And if you use the code experience2, you can get £2 off. And also, if you spend over £55, you get a free pad. I also have their notebook and it's incredible. I would be lost without it. So go check out Tidy Think UK and have a wonderful time browsing their website. Hello and welcome back to the Teacher Experience podcast. As always, we are so delighted to have you here and listening to what we have to offer with everything teaching and anything you think is important, because we always take your questions into consideration. So today we are diving into an issue that affects every classroom, and that is behaviour and emotional regulation in schools. Now, that's in schools and that is also in classrooms specifically. We are joined by Samantha from SPD Training and Consultancy. She is an expert in supporting children with behavioural and emotional needs. Samantha, can you tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you currently do?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on. It's lovely to chat with you. Gosh, what do I do? It's always an interesting question because there's quite a lot inside what we do. But my background is in education. I started in early years and then worked my way up and have now, not long until around 20 years in education, which is scary to think. But in terms of kind of the things that I've done, my last post in school was a deputy headship, and I now deliver teacher training and go in and do consultancy and things when it comes to developing emotional regulation and behaviour skills. And we also run emotional regulations setting support for children directly in our confidence and communication coaching. Wish it was a little bit easier to say. But we do directly, we do work directly with our children and with our teachers, but we also run workshops and things for parents too, because we created something called the behaviour balance system, which is an alternative approach to behaviour. And we have got a huge focus on holistic supports when it comes to behaviour. Before we started recording, we were talking a bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is exactly why we have that in place, because our human needs have to be met. So the behaviour balance system really focuses on that. And we teach the skills behind emotional regulation, behind behaviour, not only to our children directly, but also to our parents and our educators. Because it's really helpful for the grown-ups to be able to know this stuff as well as the children.
Absolutely. I think it's so amazing that you're covering all of the bases. And I think it's so common that we actually forget about the needs of the parents.
Yes.
And we don't cover all the bases. We're like, right, what do I need in my classroom right now? What do I need to give my staff in my school right now? And we actually forget about it's a team effort. And we always say contact home. Talk to home if there's an issue in the classroom. But if we're not also training the parents on using the same skills that we're using, there isn't that consistency. And in education, that word consistency comes up all the time. So
Yeah.
why are we not trying to create consistency between school and home? So yeah, really fantastic to hear all of the work you do. And I do implore all of our listeners to go and check out your Instagram. What is your Instagram handle, just so that we can get it out as well?
SPD Training and Consultancy.
Perfect, thank you. Because to our listeners, there is so many resources out there, and you can sign up to stuff. It's super helpful. Having tried to scope through loads of it already and listen to some of your own podcasts, it's super fascinating. So thank you. So to start us off with every episode, we do a what went well and an EBI from your day or your week. So can you share your what went well and your even better?
So this week we've done lots and lots of trainings, and one of the trainings, as I shared earlier with you, was a local authority training, which was lovely. So we had lots of schools come together. So that went really well, because it's always nice to have interesting conversations with amazing practitioners, and we got lots of that in that session, so that was great. Even better if, well, I have started to come down with a cold, so my week would have been even better if that had not happened.
Absolutely.
So I keep my voice and I'm not too sniffly as we go through today. So yes, that would be my even better if. I always struggle with an even better if, because you have to be so grateful for the weeks you've had, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You really do. But funnily enough, my even better if was that I wasn't ill. So I did a classic teacher. The Friday we broke up, I got ill, and I was ill the whole way through half term into the start of this term. And I was like, why does this happen? Because I've just lost a whole week. I'm not rested because I was ill the whole time. So yeah, that my even better if matches yours, actually.
Or just stay healthy, it would be great.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? We don't ask for much. Okay, so essentially, we want to talk about then why this conversation today matters. So, from your perspective, why is emotional regulation such a big challenge in today's classrooms?
This, I think, is a huge question and such an important one. And I think it's not just the classrooms, it's homes as well. And I think we forget how much the world has changed. And we are still using the same practices in a lot of cases. And I think actually, before children can learn, they need to be ready to learn. And we talk a lot about being school ready and, meeting our achievements, meeting our goals, meeting our milestones. And we look at literacy and we look at numeracy, and we have all of these things in place for academia. But actually, we don't have a lot in place for ensuring children are ready to receive information. And I'd love to go a layer beyond that and say that we don't actually ensure that our educators are ready to educate. Actually, a lot of our teachers are struggling with dysregulation themselves. And I do a lot of work. We've got something called the Behaviour Bank, which is our online portal. In fact, it's one of the only online portals in the world that bridges home and school with a holistic perspective. And this is exactly why we set that up, because the grown-ups are often struggling themselves. Life is very stressful, it's very busy, there's so much going on, and actually it's very overwhelming for the grown-ups. And then our nervous systems communicate that to our young people, whether developmental stage aside, no matter how big or small our young people are, they will always feed off of the adults around them. And it's really interesting when we start to talk about the importance of it, because actually, if we're trying to get through our day as a grown-up and an adult, and we're trying to say, right, I've got this lesson to plan and do, and we've got to get the children to this point, otherwise they're behind, or they're not on track. Well, actually, the pressure that we are feeling then just cascades. And what we find is our children are the stop for that, the stopping point, because it comes down from leadership. Sorry, leadership, I've been there with you, but it does happen, my friends. We can't contain it all. And it then can filter down into our staff. It can filter out into our whole community, because actually we all want the best for our children. And the irony in that is that actually that pressure creates an environment that does the opposite. You know, our expectations on our children then become so high and so unattainable and unachievable, and actually unrelated to developmental stage a lot of the time, that frustrates us even more as grown-ups, and that cycle perpetuates. And the same happens at home. You know, we talk to lots and lots of parents, and we find that parents are trying to cram in so much now. You know, we, as I think a society of parents, we want to do it all. We want to take our children everywhere, give them the best that they can possibly have. We want to, you know, lots of people want to hold down jobs and do well in their jobs whilst making sure they're cooking home cooked meals, because we know that's what our children need, you know. And actually that stress level just kind of goes up and up and up. And again, then parents aren't able to show up in the way that they really want to show up, because they're feeling dysregulated from juggling all the many things that they are trying to do in their day.
I think it's crazy, isn't it? Because we're always like, right, we need to focus on the child's emotional regulation. We need to do this. We need to do this. Why are they not emotionally regulated when they come into the classroom? What can I do to make sure that I can manage their emotions? I can help them regulate. But actually, sometimes we just need to look in the mirror and go, right, hang on, I'm not emotionally ready to open my door yet. And interestingly, it's one of my pet peeves that happens at work. Obviously, they say you've got to be on your door for your threshold, etc., etc. But sometimes I'm going to be 30 seconds longer. And do you know why I'm going to be 30 seconds longer? It's because I need to emotionally regulate myself, because I've just finished a really hard year 9 class and it was really intense, and I need to go straight into my next year 11 class, which is going to be really intense, a completely different topic, etc., etc. So do you know what? I'm going to take my 30 seconds. I'm going to collect the books really calmly. They can manage in the corridor for an extra 30 seconds, because then I'm ready to stand on that threshold and let them in one at a time, say good morning, really calm, notice the ones that aren't regulated and go, that's fine, you can stay there for 2 minutes and you can come in last once you're a little bit more ready. But if I didn't take that 30 seconds, I'm going to open that door, my threshold's not going to be as good, and those kids are going to come in a little bit more crazy because I haven't had the emotional regulation to help them with their emotional regulation. And like you say, it just goes on that spiral. So I think what you said there is really, really key. We need to help. Again, it's that teamwork, isn't it? And making sure we're all on the same page of how do we actually help each other emotionally regulate, so we're all emotionally regulated, the teacher, the parent, and the child. So yeah, really good insight from you there. So the first thing I want to cover then is sort of understanding behaviour and emotional regulation. Now, I know obviously we're not going to cover everything in a 45-minute podcast. But I suppose a little bit of sort of the science and the reality of it would be good. So what exactly is emotional regulation? Because we've said the word so many times now. And how does it develop in children?
So I love the science. And as I shared, so I have my notes, so I stick to the topic because I could absolutely lose myself in this because it's such a passion of mine. And it's so interesting. The brain is so interesting. But if we think of emotional regulation as, simply put, children or any human, big or small, being able to navigate, control and manage emotion. That's it in its simplest form, you know. And when we are unable to do that, we become dysregulated. So we are either regulated or we are dysregulated, or we're somewhere in between. You know, sometimes I always think of it as a bit of a journey. Some, you know, children don't automatically become dysregulated. They kind of ebb and flow with it. And we talk a lot about ebb and flow. But what really we want to recognize when it comes to emotional regulation is that it's not a choice. And as you were talking just now, I was thinking, you know, behavior in general isn't a choice. And this is something that we really need to kind of recognize. It's not a choice for certain stages of development. It becomes a choice later on, providing they've got the skills in place for it to be a choice. But because we don't explicitly teach those skills yet, hopefully the world is changing and we will start to do this. If anyone's listening thinking we want to do that, then please get in touch. Because it's what we're about teaching those skills. But if children are not given those opportunities to learn those skills, then there is no, by a certain age, they can regulate magically. They have to be taught it. So if we think about stages of development, we have, first of all, our babies who are purely reliant on us. We meet their needs. They then regulate through co-regulation. And that is the first and, starting point, if you like, for any emotional regulation. And then when we go up to our toddlers, they start to learn those skills, but they learn those skills through us modeling it. They learn it through discussion. They learn it through practicing, through play, in capital letters. That's the starting point for them to start to learn it. Now, unfortunately for our toddlers, they are learning everything. Like their brains are building and developing at an exponential rate. So the toddler brain is very interesting, as is the teenage brain. So really interesting stages of development. And then once they get to preschool, school, they're building on those skill sets. They're starting to move into shared regulation, and then eventually practicing that self-regulation. So we've got different stages of development alongside our different stages of emotional development and regulation. But if we think about emotional regulation as really the starting point to most behaviour, and of course there are other things that feed into behaviour as well. We talk about it. We've got something called the road to regulation, which is part of our system. And we talk about emotions as fuel. So if a child is feeling a particular emotion, it will fuel them in taking action. And this is the same for adults. So if you come in and you are feeling happy, then your fuel is different to if you're coming in feeling anxious or worried or nervous. And of course, that means your behavior will be different. So they are almost two sides of the same coin, because what we see in our children is the behavior, but we don't recognize what the fuel is. And I think this is kind of, for me, the turning point for what I'm working really hard with in schools and nurseries is recognizing that behavior isn't done to us as adults. It's a byproduct of what is happening internally. It's almost like a window to the internal world of our children. And rather than having that, us versus them when it comes to behavior and emotional regulation, what we need to have is that empathy and compassion for that poor developing brain. And I say this all the time in trainings, trying to reframe it. And that actually really helps me when, my now 5-year-old is screaming at me. I'm like, oh gosh, this is hard. As a parent, it's hard. As a practitioner, it's hard. But my go-to thought and my reminder to myself is always, you poor developing brain, because it just softens the blow as an adult.
It's something we always have to remember, and I think this is regardless of what stage you are teaching or what stage you are parenting. The behaviour isn't aimed at us. Even when it verbally is aimed at us, it's not aimed at us, and it, like you said, it is just a byproduct. The frustration I have is, as a secondary school teacher, is not having because you teach so many children. Yes. So in one day I can see 150 kids.
Yeah.
So it's really hard as a secondary school teacher to be able to identify and have the time to manage actually what needs aren't being met. So I can see that a need's not being met, but I've also got 28 other children or 30 other children in this class. I haven't been given any information from the pastoral team. There's evidently something going on, but have the pastoral team got capacity to deal with you? Are they going to deal with you? And that's what I struggle with as a secondary school teacher. And I know loads of secondary school teachers struggle with it because, again, we might only see these kids for the younger years, it's 3 times a week. So trying to provide that time and provide everything you need to understand that child becomes really difficult. Whereas obviously with a primary school teacher, they see that child every single day, all day, and they have a little bit of a higher ability purely because of time and capacity to understand that child and what needs aren't being met. So I think, yeah, just as a secondary school teacher, I think that's my view of it. It can be really difficult.
It can be. You're absolutely right. And I think proximity is so powerful. You have to be near someone in order to see all of the things, don't you? And if you're not near to them all the time that they're at school, then it's going to be really difficult. And there are things you can do and put in place to help with that. We're actually trying to work with more secondary schools because, as you said, you know, it is really hard to set this up in the secondary schools by yourselves, because there are lots of tools that are available that secondary schools don't utilize. And I think actually our teenagers, very much like our toddlers, are going through a really huge experience. And I think when it comes to secondary schools, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the biggest challenges is fear. We're dealing with some really big brains, really big bodies, and they might be going through a toddler similar experience, but they're huge. They're really huge, and actually I've spoken to lots of secondary school teachers that find them very intimidated when they're just intimidating when they are dysregulated, when the children are struggling, because they are sometimes taller than you, or sometimes louder than you, or you feel that there's a lot more of them, and actually fear is a huge driving point for a lot of behavior. We as humans, fear is a really powerful emotional a vibration and emotional fuel, because we often go into fear mode, fear of something happening or fear of something not happening. And I think in our secondary schools, a bit like you with your threshold welcoming, and pausing for a moment, we need to be setting things in place for our young people to access the grown-ups around them. We need emotionally available adults, first of all, who are emotionally regulated and who are not fearful. And we need to, in my very humble opinion, create settings that actually are less control focused and more collaboration focused. And I think this works really well with toddlers, and it works really well with teens. I mean, it works with all ages and stages, but particularly those, because the brain feels safe when it's in control. And where they are so out of control in their bodies, and with everything that's going on, they are seeking control a lot of the time, which is why we get power struggles very, very often with our teenagers and our toddlers. And actually, if we put in place different things that give them different outlets, bringing things in like movement, bringing communication aids in, having those barriers broken down of it being us versus them. And I say this so often, and it's because I've spoken to so many teenagers. I mean, we do a lot of communication and confidence coaching with teenagers, and often the one phrase I hear more often than not is, "I wish they would just listen to me." Because our teenagers don't feel heard, because they are so busy being transported from place to place. They don't get time to connect with the adults. They don't get time to connect with each other very often, other than at specific breaks. If they're, I was talking to one teenager really recently who was struggling with friendship groups, and this is a huge thing for children, particularly of that age and stage. Connection is really, really powerful, and rejection is huge. So for children who are struggling with friendship groups, the setup in our secondary schools makes life really, really unbearable at times. And if they're then not able to connect with the grown-ups as well, that isolation, that emotional pain is very similar to a physical pain. So this is why we get a lot of children that don't want to go to school, or who refuse to go to certain classes. And actually, this is where we then isolate them further. We give them detentions. We put them in isolation. We remove things. And all of that compounds. So then our children struggle even more. And it becomes this horrible cycle. And, our exclusion rates are so high. Our suspension rates are so high. And actually, if we brought them closer and had more connection with them and gave time in the day in each lesson for them to have that connection with the grown-up or with each other, you know, soft starts are really powerful no matter what age and stage you're working with, because it gives them that time to, you know, just kind of breathe. We need upregulation as much as we need downregulation. In primary schools, we have this whole focus on calmness, keeping them calm. In secondary schools, we talk about it too, you know, but we don't have calm corners in secondary schools. But, you know, actually, we don't want to use calm as another way to ensure that children are, you know, doing what we want.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we use calm, you know, this focus on well-being, but sometimes the word calm is actually us trying to ensure that children are doing what we want. And I talk about this so much, but that idea that we don't want calm as compliance. You know, we can make sure that in our secondary settings and our primary settings that we have a balanced approach, and that children get regulation and down regulation when they need it.
Absolutely. And I think I'm going to circle back to that word fear that you said, because I think I understand what you're saying about the fear of, maybe some teachers get a fear of, I don't know, boys, I'm being very stereotypical, but boys having a fight. That's scary, because it's like, and I've been in that position, it's like, good, you're 2 6-foot boys, I'm a 5-foot female, and they get blinded. So it's like, I can't really do anything apart from tell you to stop, but you're not going to stop, and just protect the other people in the classroom until I get support. But actually, I think there's sort of a flip to that. I think there's fear from teachers of, they need to stay in the parameters that are getting set by leadership. And naturally, there are parameters. We need to do this as the starter activity. We need to do, by 10 minutes in, you need to be doing this. By 30 minutes in, you need to be doing this. And there's fear of, well, actually, how do I fit in that time to get to know my children? How do I fit in that time to have that calm, but it not being a behavior thing, it being we're going to spend 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever it is. Actually, you don't have to sit in silence, because you're calm, I'm going to circulate, and I'm going to have a chat with you guys. I'm going to tell you what I did at the weekend, and you're going to tell me what you did at the weekend. And I can see you're looking a little bit sad, so I'm going to pop over and say, what's up? Like, can I do anything to help you? And I think there's a fear in teachers that if they do that and someone walks in, that member of leadership is going to be like, well, why are they not in silence? Why are you having irrelevant conversations during a lesson? I think that's such a shame, because the only way someone goes in and does a good observation and goes, oh, you've got really good relationships with your children, is because that teacher spent that time having those conversations and putting in that time to get to know their children. So for me, I'd love to be able to break down those barriers of, you as a teacher, you don't need to have the fear of leadership judging you getting to know your children, because it's not in those parameters. And obviously, like, there has to be professional judgment there of how you do that and how much time you spend doing that, and does it fit in with what you're doing. But as someone that's obviously worked really, really closely with ECTs and NQTs, or the old NQTs, and trainee teachers, I think it's fantastic when I walk in and I'm seeing them build relationships and having normal conversation, because it's like you are making sure that children feel safe in your classroom. How amazing is that?
Yeah. I mean, there's no better gift, is there? You know, and I think actually what you're saying is completely accurate. You know, I think you're not alone in feeling that. There's so many teachers that feel that, and I think this is where we need to almost turn the system on its head, because in what world is that set up okay? You know, you wouldn't go to work, I mean, unless you work from home by yourself, you know, somewhere, but you wouldn't go to work and speak to no one about anything other than work. You know, everyone needs them. I always call them the water cooler moments. You know, we all need that time where we're like, oh, do you have a good weekend? Or, oh, this weather's nice. I mean, who doesn't love to talk about the weather if you're Brits? But, you know, thinking we have that chit chat, and actually that's an important skill. children need to learn how to have chit chat amongst each other, because it's a huge social skill that really will serve them as they get older. But I think, these are the conversations we need to be having with senior leadership teams. These are the conversations that we need to be looking into in more depth, or these are the problems we need to be looking into more depth, because actually when these are in place, all these, these relationships, our children are ready to learn.
Yeah.
And that circles back to what we were saying before. It's not about being school ready. It's not about, having all these outcomes. It's about being in that, that receptive mode. And children and young people are not in receptive mode if they're in fight or flight, if they are feeling stressed, if they are, sitting there wishing they were someone else or somewhere else or someone else. Actually, lots of children, really struggle with identity and things. So all of this is the foundation for learning. And I think no matter where we are in education, whether we're working with little ones or big ones, this needs to change. Our approach to education needs to change. There's so many educators and parents who are part of this movement, and it is a bit of a movement because we are moving away from those behaviourist theories and those, that approach that is kind of do as I say and not as I do, and, respect me because I'm bigger and all that sort of thing. Actually, if we start to utilise what we know now about the brain and about development, and we have this in place. I always talk about having preventative support, having relational support, and having restorative support. And if those three elements are in place, our children will thrive. That is how, that's part of our balanced approach. That's how we create an environment for learning. And I think that works with all ages and stages of life. It doesn't necessarily just work with children. It works with us as grown-ups. If you've got staff that are struggling, if we take those three approaches, if you're listening as leaders, if you take a preventative approach, if you have that relational approach, and you've got those restorative practices in place, then our staff thrive as well. And of course, that crosses the bridge to home.
Absolutely, it really does. And I think having all of those approaches with children and staff is so important, so important. As a leader, I've had so many conversations with other leaders about, well, actually, this is what our department needs right now because they're feeling this. And I'm in so as a lead practitioner, I've always been quite a fortunate position that I'm not a head of department and my feet are still on the ground, in terms of, because I'm not head of department, staff feel like they can come and talk to me. So it's quite nice that I can have that middle ground of, I know what's going on in the ground, I know how they're feeling. And actually, as a leader, I then have the ability to go, right, this is what we need to do. This is how our team is feeling at the moment. And I don't need to name names. I don't need to say anything. I can just be like, I know that this is the feeling across the department at the moment. So we need to do something about it. And to prevent this happening again, this is what we're going to do. So it's quite nice to have that and sort of circulating back to the kids. Today, I've taken on an extra year 11 class. And I think I've seen this child maybe 3 times because I've done some extra revision with her before. And she was first one in the room. I was like, normally I don't let them in the room, but she was first one in. And she was like, Miss, I know I don't really know you, and like I've not really spoken to you that much before, but can I just have like a 30-second rant? And it was like, absolutely you can. Go for it. I was like, I'm all in. And she was like, oh, I feel better now, thanks. And it was like, no problem. Not like, and that's all you've got to do. You've just got to be there for the kids and let them feel how they feel. It's the same as us when we get annoyed. What do? We want to have a little rant, and then we go, oh, I feel better now. I'm all good. Panic over. I just needed to get it out my system. And so I think that links actually quite nicely onto the next bit that I wanted to chat about, which was triggers and classroom challenges.
Yes.
So I think if we just sort of go with what, in your experience, and obviously you work with a lot of different teachers and different parents and different schools, what are the main triggers that cause emotional outbursts or disruptive behaviour or that dysregulation?
I think so. This is a really huge question because, again, thank you so much. No, it's great because these are the conversations we need to be having. But in terms of the reason it's a really huge question is because no brain is the same. Well, they're like fingerprints. So everyone's brain works differently, which means everyone's, nervous system is heightened by different things. We're all triggered by different things as a result of our, model of the world. So it's very difficult to say, there's, one thing will trigger children. But it tends to be grouped into four main areas. First of all, sensory or sensitivity. There is a lot of sensory overwhelm, particularly if thinking about your age group of young people. They are on their phones a lot, and there's a whole discussion that we can have about screen time. That's a whole other episode. But in terms of sensory input, screens provide a lot of sensory input. And then on top of that, they have they have that world, their tech world in their hand or what have you, but then they have their real world around them. Then they have their internal world. So they've got all of these worlds that they're trying to juggle, which is very, difficult. And on top of that, we've got that sensitivity, that physical sensation that they are experiencing, hormone change, the growth experience, whether they are sitting, standing, all of these things, they've got all the senses going. So that's a really huge input and can be very triggering because, of course, it can be very overwhelming. We spoke about it earlier. Control is a huge one. The need to feel in control when you're feeling out of control of all the other things is a really big trigger. So if, just like if someone was to say that you couldn't do something as a grown up, I know I don't like being told I can't. It makes me very, very motivated. Can but for our developing minds, being told no over and over and over again is really challenging, and it makes us feel unsafe because, again, it removes control. So our young people and our children are set up for failure in that, a lot of their day, because they have very little control. They don't choose what they wear, they don't choose where they go, they don't choose who they sit with, they don't choose what lessons they have. I mean, they do get to choose what food they eat sometimes, but a lot of the time their choices are made for them, which is really disempowering and hard for them. So that's another really big one. And then the other two we've already touched on as well, that fear of something happening or not happening, and that connection, that need for connection. And that need for connection is strong for all of us, but incredibly strong for our teenagers. And it's not necessarily, the same need for connection as they had previously in their, their life journey up to that point, because it suddenly shifts, and that peer communication and connection is really, really important to them. But then on top of that, you have, those unmet needs of the physiology and things, and implicit memory. And again, I could talk about implicit memory forever, but the idea that we have these memories that are stored physically rather than being conscious, and a lot of triggers are actually triggered because there is an implicit memory about something, and because children haven't been, and grown-ups don't know about this, so they don't get to utilize. Most grown-ups that I have worked with over the years that I've done all the things, we all want the best for the children, and we all would do the things that we can do and have access to. But unfortunately, the grown-ups don't know about these things, so we don't know about implicit memory. And implicit memory is the difference between being able to verbalize and understand and acknowledge and move forwards and process, or being stuck. So we have a lot of young people, a lot of children, a lot of adults stuck with certain elements, and it's because they haven't managed that processing of it. They haven't brought it from implicit to explicit, and actually that's a really big thing for our young people, because there will be times where they're triggered and you'll say, why did you do that? And they're like, I have no idea, I couldn't even tell you, I don't know why I felt that way, I just got that feeling and then I just did it. And actually they're not lying. I hear stuff, you know, where they just don't admit it, they just don't tell the truth, and they are telling their truth, which sounds so woo-woo, you know, it's their truth, but it actually is, you know. You love, I've had people say things, you know, it sounds so fluffy, but actually when you look at the brain development, you look at these things and you look at the body, that is their reality, because that is the experience they're having.
Absolutely.
And
I've
it's
had
really
that conversation, really difficult. I've had that conversation recently, actually, with a few of my my trainees, and they said they're just not getting it, and it's like they're not going to, because they're year 7, and the brain development of a year 7 compared to a year 10 is really different. So the way you need to deal with that year 7 student is really, really different, because they will just go, I don't know, I just did it. And it's like, okay, that's fine. We don't need to fight why they did it, because, like you say, they are telling their truth. What we need to do is actually maybe step them outside and have a conversation about what triggered that, and help them understand what triggers that behavior, or help them understand, if they do it, actually what's their next steps, because once they've done it, they probably know they shouldn't have done it, but they don't know why they did it. So it's actually, as a teacher, as an educator, we need to go, right, you did that behavior, do you understand why you did it? No, I don't know, I just did it. Cool. So do you know what maybe led you to do that? Oh, well, actually, this happened at home this morning. Okay, right. So there's a good start. And then we can deal with that behavior.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Gosh, that was hard. Like, you know, when children behave in any big way, regardless of age or stage, you know, just asking, are you okay? How are you feeling right now? Because that looked like it felt really hard, you know,
Yeah.
and you can almost guarantee that will just give that, oh, thank goodness I'm not going to be in trouble. It's not going to go on. It's not carrying on, you know, and just
the teacher's there to help me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they're not juggling that guilt as well as whatever the underlying emotion is. And that need to please is removed, because they're like, oh, it's okay. I'm not being judged, and I'm not going to get, you know, hauled over the coals or whatever because I've made a mistake. And I think our older children are just as much likely to make mistakes as our younger children, and my goodness, our adults make mistakes, don't we? So if we have that empathy and we allow for mistakes to be made, you know, things like I hear, especially with the older children, you know, adults will say they're being disrespectful. You know, they're not showing me respect, and it's interesting because when you talk to the teenagers, they say the same thing, that they do not feel respected. And this terminology of respect seems to just be like tennis, you know. Like, we hear it so much, and actually, if everyone's feeling disrespected, how does it stop? How do we stop passing that disrespect? You know, it actually stops with the thought that it's disrespect, because we're not going on their way to disrespect someone else. You know, we just react, you know, for our own means. You know, it's actually not about the other person most of the time. We're all very, you know, very conscious for ourselves in that moment, not the other person. And
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that, because I had a similar conversation with a couple of year 10 boys. And I said that, and I used the word respect, absolutely. But it was about getting them to understand why their behaviour wasn't a respectful behaviour, and actually can they see why that's not respectful. And it's not just that disrespectful, like you can't do that. It's, can you see why? Can you see what the behaviour should have been? Can you what would you like me to do for you not to do that? Is there something else that I can do for you not to make that reaction? Have I triggered something for you to do that? So I think what I'm trying to say is it's not just about discipline. You've done something wrong, you've got a detention. It's actually about what's the trigger, and then how do we help them learn to regulate that and figure out what their triggers are, and how do they respond if they do get triggered and they do that behavior. How do they then manage that afterwards with the respected adult.
I agree. And I think actually discipline doesn't work. We live in a society that is living proof that discipline does not work. Our prisons are full of disciplined people. Yeah, it doesn't work. This is why we get repeat offenders. Discipline is our go-to for trying to reassert control. And actually, if we in our education system removed the concept of we have to punish and having these punitive punishments, and we started to recognize that we need to teach explicitly what we expect, and that we need to start to have natural and relatable consequences. I always say this to people, and they kind of, I get a little bit of an eye roll, because they're like, oh yeah, we just remove all discipline, no discipline, she says, the world will go mad. But actually, there are natural consequences to everything. I always use the idea that if you touch the cooker and get burnt, you get a consequence. Now, I always, we don't want children touching cookers. This is not what I'm saying. Please do not ask anyone to seek out natural consequences. But it's something that our children need to learn, is that actually, if you behave in a particular way, there is a natural consequence. If you say that to a friend, the consequence that you will be met with is them not liking it and wandering off, or there is a ripple effect to behavior. And I think we need to teach that, but I don't think that we need to punish things that our children are getting wrong, because ultimately that creates an unsafe space for learning. And then where do they have the safe space to learn that? And I think,
I've always thought, like, obviously I've only got a secondary school perspective, but I've always thought, why do we do detentions? Like, genuinely, why do we do them? Because they just go to a room, they sit there in silence, they moan about sitting in silence, and it's like, right, I understand that we need a natural consequence for misbehaviour, because we do. They need to learn. But the way they're going to learn is we give them the consequence, like we explicitly teach them that caused you not to learn, for example. So you doing that, we'll talk to you about the trigger, and we'll talk to you about how you manage that, etc., etc. But you doing that meant you didn't learn, which means actually your consequence, you're not going to go into a room and sit in silence. The consequence is maybe you stay for an extra 15 minutes, or it's not time bound, but you catch up on the work that you missed because of your dysregulation. And at the same time, as a teacher, I can sit there and talk to you about why there was that dysregulation. You've caught up on your work, you're a lot more relaxed, and that's all the consequences. The consequences that you're just going to have to catch up on your work, and you get to have a one-on-one conversation with a teacher that can help you through that. And it's like, to me, that's a lot more beneficial than chucking them in a room. And then if they don't turn up, they go and sit in isolation all day. And I think we're swinging right back to what you said at the very beginning, which is the more we remove them from education, the less they're going to want to come in, the worse their grades are going to get, the more dysregulated they're going to get. And we're back in that vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So I think, again, it's just about helping them regulate, isn't it?
It is. And I think we talk a lot about positive outs. And I think every classroom could have this available. There is not one classroom that cannot have a positive out, like, set up, whether it's secondary or primary, because ultimately, if punishment doesn't work, if we don't have time to explicitly teach, which we do need to make time for, there has to be something in the middle. There has to be something that children can utilise when they get that emotion, when they get that need not being met. And I think, with it, when it comes to our education system, we, as I said before, we set them up to fail, because we remove we remove the control, we remove all the things, and we kind of keep it to the adults, so the adults feel safe. But actually, we then set them up to fail, to have big behaviours, to have this, sometimes explosive moment. But if we put in place things that they can utilise to to navigate emotional regulation, then they kind of don't need to get to that point. And I think, in every classroom, I'm a huge fan of rebounders. I'm not affiliated with any rebounding companies, any mini trampoline companies at all. But I think they are fantastic tools for emotional regulation. They are really great for upregulating, but they're also really good for a whole host of other health benefits. And I think that every classroom should have one. And children will not stay long on a rebounder if they do not have to, because it's for
listeners what one of those is, in case they don't know.
So it's a mini trampoline, and you get all different sizes. Some fold away and some do not. But children can upregulate themselves and shift emotional fuel by just jumping on it for a little while. So if they've been sitting for too long, and they're really great, they support a whole host of wonderful benefits, physically and emotionally. But they're really powerful. And if you can't get one of those in your classroom, getting a spot, like a rubber spot on the floor in the corner and a skipping rope works just the same, for emotional regulation. Or having fidget tools. I mean, most practitioners will fidget at some point while they are teaching. Lots of teachers like to move around with their pen or their clicker. I do when I'm training, but actually having fidget tools available are really important, but it's really important to teach the use of them. There's no point in just giving out these tools and expecting children to just know what to do, and know what serves them. They have to have exploration time to be like, okay, yeah, this just distracts my brain because it's fun. This one helps my brain focus because it's the right texture, it's the right movement, it's the right whatever. And they need the opportunity to practice it. But once that's in place, again, when they start to feel fidgety or they start to feel dysregulated or something crops up, they can reach for it. If you are struggling with communication in your classrooms, having some sort of place where children can just come and pop something in the box, we call it a communication box. We also call it connection box, different names for different educators that they prefer. But the idea is that we remove things like worry boxes that focus on one emotion, because lots of children are then like, well, it wasn't a worry, so I didn't tell anyone. We want everyone to be able to share what they need to share. But sometimes that's just useful, and the process of writing something down helps just get rid of it. It's a little thought download. I always promote, we've got like a layout for lesson plans, always promote allowing children, when they come straight into a classroom, to just write whatever's in their head. And whether they come and put it in the box or if they put it in the bin, whatever, doesn't matter, because that thought download makes space for them, the rest, to enter. It puts them in that mode of ready.
It's exactly the same technique as adults are using for mental health, using journaling. It's exactly the same thing. We'd thought dump onto a book, and we've helped ourselves emotionally regulate and make space for everything else. So it's exactly the same example. It's funny you say about the movement as well. Obviously, it becomes quite hard in secondary with classrooms and judgment, etc., with teenage kids. But one of the things I like to do, if I can see a child getting dysregulated, it's like, cool, you can hand the sheets out, or what, you can just stand up. Like, you can stand and work at your best. And like, they look at me like, can I actually? It's like, yeah, of course you can. I can see you need to stand up because you're getting all fidgety. So stand up and do your work. And they're like, oh, thanks, miss. And it's like, then I've got no behaviour issues, and they've had a moment to just sort themselves out. And interestingly, I don't know if you've listened to it, but we did a podcast with Shinsei Academy in Manchester, I think they're based. But they're an alternative provision, and they do martial arts, and then English and maths, and that's all they do. But he was saying that one of the things, like you said, is the kids that come in there, obviously they've been permanently excluded, etc., etc. But they said they never felt respected in school. And one of the things he does is he lets them move around desks. So when it could be the middle of an English lesson, and it's like the kids are allowed to just get up, move to a different desk, because they need that movement break. They need that stimulation of something else. and those provisions are fantastic for allowing children to explore their emotional regulation more so than mainstream. And it's like, how do we get all of these techniques from alternative provisions and put them into mainstream, which I'm sure we could talk about forever.
Okay.
But I think that leads us quite nicely. So we end every episode on a bit of a research bite. So I thought today the research bite could actually be, do you just have maybe 1 or 2 strategies that a teacher could, and we've already spoken about a few of them, but 1 or 2 strategies that maybe a parent or a teacher could use to help children practically, maybe through de-escalation or something of the sort?
Absolutely. So the first thing is always make sure you're regulated. If you are not regulated, it really doesn't matter what the children are doing. You're going to find it hard because you're going to be sensitive to things, and that's okay. So we always talk about setting up, support for yourself first. And then there's lots of things you can do for that. We talk about balance baskets for adults and for children. And if anyone wants information on that, then please just, get in touch. Happy to help. But just making sure that you've got yourself covered. And then after that, I think the next one would definitely be to look at movement in your classroom. Standing stations are fantastic. Children can just up and just wander over to the standing station whenever they feel like it and stand, or they can just stand whenever they need to. That's really important. And I think if you have that as part of your teaching practice, and this is something that I'm thinking about for what you were saying about fear of judgment. Having an agreement of practice for yourself is really key. And I think actually, if you have that up somewhere, we have, oh gosh, I was using it earlier. We have this for primary schools, which you can download from the Behaviour Bank. We've got lots of different ones, but the idea of flexible seating. Now, this is a really great, teaching practice, is to just recognise that we don't want children, looking at the speaker and all this jazz, because actually that's not how children really listen. And they can't listen if they're uncomfortable. So allowing flexible seating, and if you're a secondary school educator, it's the same principle. If your children need to stand up or just move to the radiator, sometimes children are cold, and actually standing next to the radiator for a few moments and just coming back is really useful. Sometimes they might be hot and want to stand next to the window for a minute. These things are just really simple needs that can be met. And you can have this as part of your, in this classroom, I teach like, and just having that up on the wall, so that if someone does come in and say, oh, what are you doing? What a waste of time. You can say, well, actually, it's part of our practice in this classroom. We make sure that we are comfortable and ready to learn. The children communicate when they are not, so that we don't waste time combating behaviour later down the line. And this is how that looks. And you can lean into the evidence. There's so much evidence available. Happy to share with anyone that wants some evidence to take to their senior leadership. But it makes all the difference, because if that just becomes your common practice, it, the children know it, and it just bridges that gap for them. So that's another one. And then I guess the thought downloads or brain dumps is a really powerful one, and just popping it in like a communication box if they want help with something. And then of course that can be either passed on to your pastoral team if you're a secondary school teacher, or it can be passed on to the relevant people. You can pick it up when you see them next, or if you're a primary school teacher, you just kind of check in with them and just let them know that you've read their note, and whether they want you to kind of chat or not. Children sometimes just want to draw something out and put it in. They just want to feel seen,
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Samantha, for sharing all of those. That was so helpful. I could genuinely sit here and talk all evening about everything, but you have been fantastic. So really a huge thank you. To our listeners, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Please do go and find Samantha on Instagram. Samantha, can you just give us your Instagram handle once more?
Yes, it's SPD Training and Consultancy.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners, and we will see you in our next episode.
Thank you.